That's also one of the reasons why we started this journey and started this channel, to actually guide people along the way. But not only that, is also to share our experience with it, because we had that in the past of not getting a tenant out, not because we placed that tenant, but because we inherited that tenant from the house that we bought from the estate, or one of the houses that we bought from the estate. So that's also to share some knowledge on that point.
Yeah.
Like, how did we get her out at the end of the day, that specific tenant? But there was a cost involved with that. It wasn't
I think let's take a coffee
Leaflet.
break and
Yeah.
then we can go into that detail.
Let's get into that detail.
afterwards.
Thanks. Today's going to be quite an interesting topic. We will be discussing finance versus property and the benefits thereof. So yeah, stay tuned. So I think today let's have a debate firstly on property versus finance and how that comes into play with one another, because that's a big discussion point in the industry right now. And there's obviously pros and cons. I think let's unpack the pros first. We'll get to the cons at a later stage. I just think for our viewers, let's give them a nice, interesting debate in terms of the information out there.
Yeah, there's a lot of information out there, especially on social media. And what I do like, it is becoming a little bit better and more realistic as to when people compare paper investment versus property investment. So obviously there's two sides of this coin, and I think at the end of the day it's also about diversification and what it is that you personally like, property versus paper. So yes, there's a lot of calculations that gets done to compare the two. So if you look at let's say a unit trust or a S&P 500 or one of those things that you're better acquainted with.
We're going to discuss that just now.
Yeah. So with property, I always feel that I like property. It's tangible, something you can look, feel, and touch. You can drive to it. You can live in it. You can, you can obviously do forced depreciation on it. There's a lot of things that you can physically do to enhance the investment. Obviously, if you bought in the wrong area, or if the area is deteriorating and it's kept on too long, then it's also a negative.
Let's okay. So I just want to unpack it a little bit more, because at the end of the day, property being a tangible asset doesn't normally make it a good investment if it's a tangible asset. However, I want to run through a few points. So firstly, let's look at the leverage thereof. So for me, a big benefit to property is basically using the bank's money to acquire that property. Yes, you will have to fork out some funds yourself in the event of a deposit, possibly, or in the event of there's bond registration, transfer fees, etc. But there's many costs associated with it. But I do think let's look at how you can use this leverage, because with other investments, whether tangible or not, you seldomly get investments that you can use as much leverage as with a property, correct?
Yes, so that's what I said earlier with regards to the different calculations that gets done. So sometimes people will do a calculation based on if you invested so much money into the S&P 500, that's how much return I would have gotten over the 20 years. But remember, property, you don't have to fork out the cash. You only fork out maybe for the transfer, maybe a deposit. So there's fees applicable, yes, but you can purchase a R1 million property for only the cost of the transfer cost, and if a deposit, you can actually take out 100% bond, and so you will get a for investment of, let's say, 100,000 rand, argument's sake, your transfer cost, etc. You'll get R1 million asset that will grow.
So basically, if I use the formula, let's say for instance, I need 200,000 rand for 2 million rand investment, correct? In a sense, if I need 100,000 for this million investment, 100%. So you can basically use 100,000, 200,000 of your own capital and get a 1 or 2 million rand investment. That's why I said using the bank's money. So that's where the leverage component comes in. So the leverage is a big contributing factor to the benefit of it. And tell me on a rental income basis, obviously I think that's a second discussion point. Rental income, obviously using that as cash flow, because your tenant will be paying the bond over time. So that's obviously a major benefit with regards to property. So on the rental income side, that will also give you some cash flow, which other investors might not give you. Correct.
100%. So what we call the rental engine. So look, again, something that came up now while you were talking that I was thinking about is it's also very important to invest in the right areas, because not all areas will be capital appreciate thing, over time. So we in Cape Town, so we are very fortunate. I think I almost want to go as far as to say that every single area in Cape Town, even if it's not the greatest area, there is capital appreciation.
Capital growth. I think that's a big point. That's actually the next point. And just on that topic, I do think, and I look at Western Cape as a place where you can still get not allowing yet, but I do look at Western Cape as a place where you can get some decent capital growth on your properties. And I do think you might not get the same yield in other areas.
100% correct. So that's, for example, there's areas, and I don't know the areas, and I'm not familiar that familiar with Joburg, but there's certain areas in Joburg that's actually depreciating in capital value. So that's what I say. It's very specific as to where you invest. Yes, there's also the naysayers or the people that did invest in property previously that got bitten and burned. That does not necessarily want to reinvest in property, which is also fine. And for them, a paper asset is better. No problem there. I'm not saying the one is better than the other, but there's definitely clear differentiations between the two. But I understand property. And obviously there's a lot of other benefits in property, like gearing, like leveraging, like using other people's time, other people's money. There's a lot of benefits. Yes, there's cons as well. When you bought in a certain area, you're stuck to that area. If you bought in South Africa, you're stuck in South Africa.
I think that's where the bit of a concentration risk comes in, but we're going to address that at a next session, where we're basically just going to be discussing some of the disadvantages. But the purpose, I think, is to go through all the advantages, and not all. Obviously, there's many. We'll only address some. But I think you've mentioned leverage, you've mentioned rental income, you've mentioned capital growth. I also think it's an inflation edge at the end of the day. Looking at an inflation edge, because at the end of the day, you can increase that rental income from a tenant every year, maybe slightly more than inflation. So it gives you that bit of hedge as well. However, it also depends in what circumstances we are in market and the interest rates, etc.
So one of the things, or there's a lot again jumping to my mind here, but someone, a very wealthy guy, told me a while ago. He said, "Albert, just remember, you'll also go through what do you call it?
Go through some tough times."
Yeah, no, tough times never last. What do you call it? A recession. So you'll also go through a recession in your lifetime, and then there will be, things like interest rate hikes, inflation that's high, all of those things that you will get. So you must be very careful not to over-invest or overextend yourself.
Or over-leverage.
Over-leverage yourself.
Which also happens quite often, eh?
100%, and that you must be very careful for that. So we always try to, I'm just going to use our strategy, and you also you still need to have some kind of liquidity and capital in your property. People always say property isn't liquid, but you need to make sure that there's liquidity in the property, and we'll explain a bit more about that.
We will get to the liquidity front of it now, but in terms of that point, and stressing on that point where being over leveraged, I mean, leverage can be good, but over the leverage is bad. So as it can be good, it can be very bad as well.
Needs to be managed.
So it needs to be managed accordingly.
So
I do think that's definitely something very important. And then also, I think if we just look at the value creation out of a property, for instance, let's say, and that's what we've done here at the Smart Network, we've basically bought some properties where we've renovated it and basically just repurposed that property to a much higher value as what we've actually bought it for. And I think that's where the value creation comes in, which is, and we'll get to the other investments now, but I think from an investment perspective, if you use the property for value creation, it's a good vehicle to use, because if you buy a property for 1.4, you renovate, it's worth 2.2 thereafter, you've made an 800k more or less return in that sense. But at the end of the day, I do think value creation and the leverage of it and using the bank's money, that's the two, for me, that's the two main components of a property. Don't you think?
Look, okay, so there's a lot of different ways of looking at what type of return the investor would like out of the property. So and there's different yields will work for different people for different reasons. But what you rightfully said now, and what we do is we buy property below market value. Obviously, or most of the time, the property does need betterments or renovation costs or renovations or whatever the case might be. So But we buy those properties and we repurpose it. So that's my work. I go and well, that's my work in the Smart Network and in Veyers Property Group, is to go and find these type of properties and see how we can unlock
The
value. And then one of the things, so our strategy is to look at two ways of it. I always, when someone comes and sit with me and they want to buy a property for investment purposes, there's two ways of looking at it. So one is cash flow and one is capital growth. So a lot of people like the like sectional schemes, like flats, because there's low maintenance cost. Yes, there's a levy and there's other costs, but it's low maintenance cost, low insurance cost, all of those things. So it's an easy, I almost want to say strategy, but you have to buy at the right price. A lot of different things that you have to look at there. But what we do is we look at freehold properties. So a little bit more maintenance cost, a little bit more risk involved to a certain extent, but there's a lot more benefits, in my opinion, to that property, because you can do what you want with the property, well, within the laws and regulations of the council, of course. But there's ways of unlocking capital. So first off, if you do buy a property below market value, maybe that needs some renovation or some repair work. If you do a forced depreciation on a property, let's say, for example, you just do some aesthetic upgrades like painting, or maybe doing a kitchen or a bathroom, which is obviously expensive, but that will increase the value of the property. So that's what we do. Then, so that's one thing, unlocking value, capital growth there, forced depreciation.
That forms part of the value that you're creating from this property. So you're
100%.
actually creating value. By adding value, you're creating more value. So sometimes you'll add, so how can I make this analogy? So sometimes you'll add, let's say, a 1 point improvement, but it will give you a 2 point improvement in terms of the value created over there. Or maybe let's rephrase it. Let's say you're creating 1 point of value, but it will add 2 points of value on the flip side. So so what we do is we will. Okay, so our strategy is to look at both. So both the capital as well as the cash flow. So that's why we have to repurpose. So we'll buy a property, divide it into 2 or 3 or 4, how many ever units, obviously according to the regulation of the council. Then so we've already, by the time the tenant moves in, we've already increased the capital value. So we've done forced depreciation. You can sell that property for more than we bought it for, and obviously the cash that we forked out to do the renovation. So over and above the purchase price cost incurred, we'll still, if we sell it the next day, we'll still make a profit. And the second thing is the rental. So as soon as the tenant is in, for the rest of our lives, that property will yield that rental income, and it will only escalate on a yearly basis. So there will be escalation right through the lifetime of the property, and that's also why it's very important when people come to sit down with us and consult with us, that we look at what is your exit strategy at the end of the day, because that's going to make a big difference. Age versus exit, and a number of other factors. And risk comes to play as well, but we'll speak about the risk in more detail as well. Okay, thanks for that. And then another thing, you've mentioned the tangible asset, you've mentioned the paper asset. So obviously tangible asset, paper assets, that's two different things. Property being a tangible asset, it's that brick and mortar feel to it. That's why it will never go away. I don't think personally it will ever go away. Because at the end of the day, you have to stay somewhere.
Yeah.
So that's also a big plus, because if you can find a property in the right area and in the right market segment, basically, then you will always have a tenant that's looking for a place to stay. And I think that comes down to the especially in Cape Town. So it ties all that together, but that's where it comes down to the tangible asset. I think another thing what we also need to look at is creating wealth through debt. So now you're probably thinking, but geez, how is that? I'm talking about wealth and debt in the same sentence here. But I do think from a debt perspective, and we've had many of these discussions, is that you get your good debt and you get your bad debt. So looking at the good debt, so getting a bond, that can be considered as good debt, depending obviously affordability, etc. There's other factors around to it. But that's considered better debt than debt on a credit card, for instance, which is at these high interest rates, 20, 21, 22%, whatever they charge. So
I think, sorry, Ryan, to mention you, but I think to put it simply is also looking at long-term versus short-term debt. I think that's a I think, a very clear differentiator if you're looking at long-term debt versus short-term debt.
So
So
you would say-
long-term debt being
sorry
a
to
property.
Yeah, so sorry to interrupt you, but long-term debt, that refers to the more taking out the bond for 20, 25, 30 years, whatever the case, and then maybe paying it off sooner. Great. But at the end of the day, your short-term debt, that is where your expensive debt comes into play. That's where the expensive money comes in. So capital borrowed from the bank or any other institution or private investors, whatever the case might be, at a cheaper rate in the short term, in the long term than what. Let me rephrase. Short-term debt, yeah, correct, will be high in terms of the interest rates that they do charge. Whereas
So, your
long-term debt, not so.
Just to give examples for the viewers there, short-term versus long-term. So
Yeah.
short-term, like your credit card, short-term
Overdraft
debt,
facility,
overdraft facility, clothing accounts.
retail accounts. That's one major thing people tend to forget. I mean, they're buying a T-shirt for $200, but they end up paying $400 over 3 years.
Yeah. So how do you think, if someone comes to you, Reinu, and this is a little bit off topic now, but someone comes to you and say, listen, and that's why I always say it's so difficult to give advice on social media,
Yeah,
because everyone's personal portfolio and profile is
Looks
different. But if someone comes to you and they've got 100,000 Rand on credit card, 50,000 Rand on retail accounts, clothing accounts, etc., 300,000 Rand, 400,000 Rand car debt, and they've got a property and they want to invest, where they just want to invest somewhere, whether it's property, whether it's paper asset, where would you start?
That's a good question. But talking about debt now, specifically in this topic, I do think it's actually, I'm going to keep it short and straightforward and simple. If you are paying more debt than the interest that you're getting, maybe it's a good thing to pay off that debt first. I'm not talking about 9% debt, 8% debt. I'm talking here about 20%, 21, 22%
That's
debt.
normally your credit card.
Normally your retail accounts, specifically your clothing accounts, etc.
A lot of people don't even know what interest they're paying on that.
No. I
on
can
that
promise you,
short-term
half of the viewers over here, if I have to ask them what interest is your, I don't want to mention any retail names, but what is your, let's use one of the retailers, what is the debt on your clothing account, or what is the interest on your clothing account? They won't know. And that's debt that they've got. They don't know about that debt that they've got, but that's charging high interest rates over there. So
maybe small amounts, but it's
100% at large. It's big
large
margins,
risk.
big margins on small amounts, basically. So, and these retailers make a lot of their money. It's from the interest, obviously, being charged. But at the end of the day, as I said, to keep it simple and straightforward, I want to almost say, like, if a client comes to me, let's use 100,000 Rand as an example. Guy want to invest 100,000 Rand in an investment vehicle. I can probably mention, let's say, 100,000 in a unit trust investment fund, but he's got 100,000 sitting on his credit card. So on the unit trust fund in a good market, you can get your double-digit returns over time, yes, on average. Very realistic to do so. But on the debt side, let's say on the credit side, you'll be paying 20% plus per year. So now you're suddenly paying in excess of 10% on your debt, but you want to invest the funds. So let's say, I just want
to understand this.
It's an open discussion on that.
So 100,000 Rand I want to invest now, but I've got 100,000 Rand on my credit card as debt. On the credit card, I'm probably paying 22% realistically.
Yeah.
And on the investment, I'll probably get a return of, let's say, 10.
Let's use a realistic figure of 10%. We obviously don't want to talk numbers.
Yeah.
I mean, depending where you invest, it can be a lot higher, it can be a lot less.
Just for the sake of this now.
Then we'll say 100,000 over here, 100,000 over there. Over a year's time, you'll be ending up paying 20,000 Rand on the one and 10,000 Rand earning on the other one. Obviously, in a deficit of 10,000, makes a huge effect. And the compounding effect from that over a few years can be quite big. Maybe in the short space of time, you won't really see it, but over a long time, the compounding effect does take its toll.
So it's like that the book, The Richest Man in Babylon.
Yeah.
It says, first pay off your debt. You have to have some savings, but first pay off your debt.
Yeah.
Make sure you pay off your debt first. And then, debt being your short-term debt, not long-term debt. And that's, I think, where there's a bit of a...
And look, it's also a peace of mind thing. A lot of the people out there that don't want debt, I mean, a lot of the viewers, they don't want debt. It's a peace of mind thing. Like, they don't want owing on the bond, so they want to put all the money into the bond. And that's something, I think that's a topic that we can discuss another day. But this is very relating to the topics that we discussed now, where we say property versus finance, because when you talk finance just now, we're going to talk about a lot of the investment vehicles, but when we talk property, it's also about people wanting to put money into their bond. It's also a thing like, yes, it's a good thing, but it's never like you never follow just a blanket approach. So it's a good thing, but there might also be some alternatives. So it's good to have best of both. But I do think that from the long-term debt side, speaking of the debt and wealth and creating wealth through debt, property, and that's why on the benefit side of it, it's one of the few things where you can actually build wealth through debt. Is property, it's brick and mortar, it's physical asset.
Yeah. And the reason for that is because your interest on the brick and mortar is normally on the lower end of the interest market, if I can put it that way. So your debt repayment is normally on a lower interest rate. So simple, prime interest rate at the moment 10.5%. So yes, that can go up, can also go down, but it can go up. But your clothing account might be at 22%. So already there's a big difference. So that's why a lot of people who buy vehicles will go and refinance that vehicle, so put that vehicle finance rather onto their property, or take that money from their property. Let's say you buy a 200 or 300,000 rand vehicle or $1 million vehicle, whatever the case might be. Rather take that money from your, if there's some form of capital in your bond, rather take that money on your bond instead of going and taking out finance on a vehicle which might be at a higher interest.
And that's what we do see. Specifically staying in Cape Town, Western Cape, we do see.
I'm also not saying you must do that. I'm just saying that's what some people do.
Yeah, but I do see, looking at all the vehicles that we see when we drive around, I mean, a lot of these guys are paying a lot more on their vehicles than on any other thing that they own. Yeah. Exactly.
I've seen people who stay in a R1 million house, but they drive a R1 million vehicle.
Correct.
That the interest on the vehicle is much more than the house.
100%.
And the vehicle is depreciating in value, where obviously the property is appreciating.
That comes down to the capital appreciation again. So I do think that's a very relevant topic, and we will still. I mean, I think that's a conversation that we can still have in terms of like how we can structure the debt accordingly.
Yeah.
I think that's what we'll cover in some next episodes, is where you actually structure the debt in such a way that it becomes favorable to you and not to a disadvantage, because we spoke about leverage and all of these things, and it's very easy to over leverage you once your debt starts accumulating. Yeah. So I think another benefit is also a legacy asset. Let's quickly talk about that. What I mean with legacy assets, I mean with transferring that property over time to future generations, and that's where the structuring comes in, and that's also purpose of the smart network, is to see how your things is structured in such a way where it can transfer over to future generations, whether it's children, etc., or grandchildren, to make sure that it gets transferred over in a sufficient or tax efficient and a cost efficient way.
I've had this question a couple of times this week, actually, how to structure, how to leave a legacy.
How you leave your legacy in terms of the physical assets. Remember, it's different from a paper asset. But paper assets can also be held in trust and these type of things. But I do think from a legacy asset perspective, that's also where property is favorable if it is structured correctly. But it can also become a disadvantage if not structured correctly, because that people inheriting that property, there might still be quite a bit of bonds owing on that. And if you don't have liquidities and things to cover that, it can
property needs to be sold, even if your will. So that's something that came up quite a bit this week. So even if you're let's say you've got 2 or 3 properties, you're not a big investor, you just have 3 properties that you want to leave to your children that you've acquired over your lifetime. Great, but like Rainer said, if there's bonds owing on that property and you pass away, that can be detrimental to your will and to your estate. Remember, whatever is in your personal capacity will go into your personal estate, and if there's not enough liquidity for transfer cost, there should be insurance on the bonds, but if there's not enough liquidity in order to transfer those assets onto whoever your next of kin, then that assets will need to be sold off.
And I think that's something that a lot of people also don't realize, is that property has to transfer to someone, and if there's a debt owing on that property is probably not going to transfer to someone if they have to sell that property at the end of the day. And remember also, if it's not structured correctly, SARS is going to be the one smiling, because at the end of the day, there's things like estate duty, taxes, and all of that comes into play. And that's normally the discussion that we'll have with our clients in terms of how is estate duty tax being taxed, because a lot of the people don't know it's taxed at 20%, for instance, or at 25% above 30 million. So that's stuff that you needs to look at, because if you're sitting with a lot of properties in your personal capacity, and I know we're talking about the advantages of property, but just on that topic, which we will elaborate further over time, is that sitting with all these assets in your personal name becomes estate dutiable at the end of the day if it's not structured correctly, and you'll be giving SARS a big chunk of that that property value at the end of the day in terms of taxes.
And let's be frank about it, no one wants to give SARS money. So
No.
you don't want to work your lifetime and give your life's work to SARS. So something that also came up
I don't
this
hope
week.
SARS is watching this though, but
I hope they are. so another thing that also came up, a lot of, I almost want to say, older folks, traditional older families, they're very hesitant, or they don't want to talk about death, don't want to talk about wills. You still get that in today's society, unfortunately. And if you die without a will, it is making life so difficult for your next of kin and your family members that you leave behind, and you don't want to do that. So rather have the uncomfortable conversations up front. Even if you don't want to have it with your family, maybe just have it with a financial advisor. Get a will structured, get that in place so that when you pass on, you know that you've left your legacy behind, and you've left,
Correct.
you haven't
the assets
left your family in a detriment,
Correct.
but
and
rather
that your
in
assets
a
are
positive
distributed
position.
accordingly as
Yeah.
per your wishes. That's basically what
Yeah.
it comes down to. I think just one more quickly to touch on the property side before we move into the investment
Coffee
space.
break.
Yeah, so that as well. I think tax advantages. So a lot of the people will also think now, but how? And the viewers will think, yes, but how can a property have a tax advantage? At the end of the day, remember, if you're buying a property in your personal capacity, let's say average investor over there has got 1 or 2 properties maybe being rented out, earning rental income. Remember, there's also some tax deductions that you can get on that. I mean, maintenance, levies, rates, things like that. At the end of the day, you can deduct that as an expense. So that brings me to the benefit of a property as well, as there's certain expenses that you can run. But take note, it doesn't apply to all individuals. Let's say, for instance, an example where it will apply if you are a commission earner, for instance, and more than 50% of your money is commission based. You're seen as a commission earner, and a portion of your expenses in the property in your personal capacity can actually be deducted against your taxable income. So that's a big benefit as well. It doesn't apply to all. If you're just a salaried individual, you won't have that benefit. But I mean, it's specifically in today's landscape, there's a lot of guys freelancing. There's a lot of guys earning commissions, not necessarily salary based. A lot of the guys working for themselves. So that's all stuff that comes into play in terms of. So that is definitely a benefit from a tax point of view as well, I do think.
Yeah, and also remember, you taking out debt, so you cannot be taxed on debt, and that's one of the big.
You can actually you can write off the interest paid on the property. That's one of the biggest benefits in terms of structuring it for tax purposes. But it's different obviously with the companies if the property is in a company. Yes, there's also then you can actually write off more expenses, but that's also something that we'll cover in more detail, because it will take some time to unpack that and how you structure that.
Also, something that came up a couple of weeks ago is someone that I've got a client, they own 2 properties, they currently staying abroad, they've got one, obviously both properties are rented out now, but now there's a vacancy on the one. So you must remember, when you invest in property, there will be vacancies. It's a business. If you only buy one, if you stay in a house and you buy a flat as a rental, you're buying a business. That's a business that you're buying. So there will be risk involved in any business. There will be vacancies. There will be maintenance. That's part of the risk, part and parcel of the risk that you're taking on. So, and I always explain to clients that got rental properties, I would rather let a property stand vacant for a month or 2 if need be, but I will not place a tenant out of
desperation
or desperation is actually the right word that I'm looking for.
But I do think that brings us to the topics that we said about liquidity. Make sure you've got liquidity for 2 or 3 months, just in the event that the property is standing without a tenant, because that is where people get into shit street, so to say, because they do fall into that gap. They get desperate, they place a tenant just out of desperation. In a few months' time, it obviously was a bad mistake, and then they can't get the tenant out, and then suddenly the property investment that was good initially is not so good anymore.
And pay your agent's commission if they're worth their while. That I must also add, because not all agents are the same, unfortunately. But fortunately, unfortunately, I don't know. But pay the rental commission, pay the rental company or the agency to do that affordability and credibility risk assessments, and ask them for that assessments. You are allowed to ask them for the credit report, because you at the end of the day want to, I suppose, know who are placed in your property, because placing someone that's not that maybe doesn't have the right credibility or affordability, placing that person now might be okay for the first month or two, but getting them out is more costly than all of those things that you're thinking about, the vacancy loss,
yeah.
paying the commission to the agency, all of those things. That's small money in the bigger scheme
And I
of
think
things
that's
to
also,
get someone out of a property. That is,
and no, rightly
that's
so, Albert. And I
expensive.
think, yes, see, and that's also one of the reasons why we started this journey and started this channel, to actually guide people along the way. But not only that, is also to share our experience with it, because we had that in the past of not getting a tenant out, not because we placed that tenant, but because we inherited that tenant from the house that we bought from the estate, or one of the houses that we bought from the estate. So that's also to share some knowledge on that point. So like, how did we get her out at the end of the day, that specific tenant? But there was a cost involved with that. It wasn't.
I think let's take a coffee
Leaflet,
break
but
and
yeah.
then we can go
Let's
into that
get
detail.
into that detail. Thanks.